Tight is an inadequate adjective for today's labor market. Canada's current paucity of spare labor at all skill levels is one of the top complaints of business. Unlike certain other complaints, there are few quick fixes for this one. Policymakers shouldn't use that as an excuse, though. The problem could have been fixed by now, as we've known for at least 2 decades that we'd be in this bind. But let's not cry over spilt milk. What are our options for dealing with the situation now? Well, before we go there, just how bad is the immediate problem? Anecdotally, it's awful. Ask anyone in leadership and they'll say hiring is harder than ever. The data agree. Canada's unemployment rate is at a half-century low, while labor force participation is at a record high. There is no wiggle room. Well, Canada isn't alone. Unemployment in the United States has not been this low since the late 1960s, and the jobless rate in the European Union has never been lower. Key emerging markets are also dealing with chronic labor shortages. The problem is big and bad enough to wonder whether anything can be done. Well, the answer is yes, and the list of solutions is surprisingly long. Number 1, immigration. It's the perennial Canadian silver bullet. The federal government's targets have increased significantly, but we've seen that before, only to see actual immigration fall short. Well, last year's increase was driven by a surge of non-permanent residents. In a typical year, we'd receive about 26,000 of this class of immigrant. Last year, the estimate was more than 400,000, boosted, of course, by the influx of Ukrainians fleeing the war in that country. Immigration is back to its standard inflow, and that's core immigration that we're talking about, which means it must increase by 60% to meet the government's targets. Then consider that there is intense international competition for skilled immigrants, and that the nations that typically send their talent abroad, India for example, are now leading the world in economic growth, meaning there's less reason for people to leave. Higher immigration inflows are a noble aim, but we'll believe it when we see it. Number 2 is accreditation. Increased immigration is probably the quickest remedy to Canada's labor shortage program. It has worked throughout our modern history. Yet even at current levels, which aren't adequate to fill the federal government's targets, Canada's annual immigration numbers are impressive. Less impressive is the integration of new immigrants into the economy, into jobs where they could make their greatest contribution. Professional accreditation is often a considerable hurdle. We've all heard stories of immigrants with multiple degrees driving taxis or plying some other occupation where their true skills simply atrophy. Development of transnational standards and accreditation protocols and a means of fast-tracking skilled immigrants would go a long way to accelerating engagement in multiple professions where the needs are great. Let's put it this way, if you broke your leg in Lagos, would you wait for a Canadian physician to be spirited over to tend to your needs? No, local doctors would do just fine. Think about it. Okay, number 3 is education. All kinds of skilled Canadians graduate from our educational institutions every year. And every year, many of them complain that they can't find jobs. Now imagine a system that perfectly matches job openings in the economy to seats in educational programs by educational discipline. Revealing gaps alone would go a long way to influencing choices at the policy, education, business, and personal levels. Just imagine the productivity gains from a more informed or even targeted system. Sure, there will be resistance, but it ultimately ensures the sustainability of the education system itself as it's currently structured. Number 4, apprenticeship. One of the keys to German manufacturing success, apprenticeship programs that effectively transfer industrial skills intergenerationally have struggled to work well elsewhere. With an entire generation of highly skilled Canadians now exiting the workforce, time is running short to ensure that their skills live on in the next generation of workers. If we're going to latch onto this, there's no time like now. Canadian companies with German operations know this, they practice it, and hey, maybe they can teach others how to do it as well. Number 5, lifelong learning. Exponential growth in technology can easily leave many behind. Frustration can lead to unnecessary early exits from the labor force, with seasoned workers taking their skills, their corporate memory, and other valuable attributes along with them. Lifelong learning strategies are a known remedy for waning enthusiasm and relevance by incrementally ensuring that skills are up to date, as opposed to sudden, significant, and in many cases unwelcome bursts of training and development. More can be done here. Number 6, retention. Aging of the population is taking a lot of talent away from the workforce. COVID seems to have sped this up in a big way. The Great Resignation is still being assessed, but it's safe to say that it has already exacerbated an already tight skilled labor situation. Doubtless many of those who jumped out wouldn't mind coming back under the right terms and conditions. Like the policies that were crafted to attract and retain millennials, policies aimed at oldsters might well lure top talent back, if only on a part-time basis. Well, it's worth a try. Number 7, mechanization. Now this one is one of the hot potatoes. Before going any further, let's put this in context. Remember, this is just one of 9 proposed remedies, and it isn't the first. Displacing people with machines led Ned Ludd and his 19th century followers to destroy new technology to preserve jobs. Back then it was a true crisis, as there was an army of surplus labor. Not so today. The ranks of workers are so thin that machines can effectively replace people that don't exist, and there still should be plenty of work for the humans. Sure, there is almost certain to be some displacement, but the need for human effort in the economy is so great that any adjustments are likely to be transitory and quick. Number 8, internationalization. And this is another hot potato. And I need to say it again before going any further. Let's put this in context. This is just one of 9 proposed remedies, and it also isn't the first. Most people in the home economy don't like jobs being outsourced to an offshore location. But when there's no one to do the work here at home, for some businesses, it's a survival strategy. Do it this way or die. This may be a good way to think about it. In contrast to immigration, internationalization of work involves importing labor without moving it. While today's geopolitics have soured this option, technology still makes it possible to engage and efficiently manage a labor force halfway around the world in population-rich locations. Long-term sustainability requires labor-intensive industries increasingly take this approach, or lose to those who do. True, it nixes the desired photo ops, but often it is what keeps the lights on. Number 9, recession. This is definitely the least desirable of all the remedies. But these things happen, recessions, and thus far we haven't been able to stop them. Sadly, this one is recession itself. As much as we don't want one, there's unfortunately nothing that frees up talent like less economic activity. Now, with Canada's downturn looking more severe than elsewhere, our domestic economy is likely to suffer, but our export sectors stand to do better. There's a key opportunity for more viable firms to go talent scouting, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so 2 warnings. First, there's a risk of foreign firms doing some creative cherry picking of Canadian talent. Second, and even more alarming, a temporary economic lull can take our eyes off the list of longer-term labor force remedies. Labor shortages are a reality that must be addressed. If anything, recession would buy us some time to get ready for the next inevitable labor crunch. Okay, this list likely goes on, but there's enough in this to keep business and policymakers busy for some time to come. Getting the remedies right is critical. Our future viability as an economy depends on it. Until next week, I'm Peter Hall.